Well, welcome back to Criminal Justice for this week. This week we're going to start by talking about the Casey Anthony case. I'm sure all of you are weirded out by the entire case and very upset about the verdict by the jury. It is one of the most bizarre cases you'll ever see. It gained national attention as being one of the most bizarre cases and had a really, really big effect on America. Many people were angry. About 98% of people believe Casey Anthony was guilty. But again, we deal in facts here, and we are dealing with the facts in the courtroom. And like I told you when I previewed this, it's the difference between what we know and what we can prove, or circumstantial evidence versus factual evidence. So let's dive in. Obviously, there's multiple things that make us feel like Casey Anthony did kill her child Kaylee, including the biggest one, which was it took her 31 days from the child actually being missing to actually calling the police, which is so far beyond bizarre. You can't explain it. It is something the prosecutors used to make the argument that no mother would ever do that. Most mothers would make it 31 minutes or 31 seconds for some before they're calling the police about trying to find their child. But she waited 31 days trying to use her own resources, not that she had any resources whatsoever, to actually make this investigation. The fact that Casey Anthony lies about everything, she lies to the police, she lied to her parents, she lied about where she worked. She actually even took them to Universal Studios before she finally admitted she was lying about that. She was lying about, obviously, Nanny the Zanny, Zanny the nanny, and that the child was stolen. She lied about her father and brother molesting her, which was the cause of all of this lying. So she lied multiple times, which did not help the case. During those 31 days, instead of looking for her child, she was at parties and at a hot body contest. During those 31 days, she gets a tattoo that says La Bella Vita, which means beautiful life in Italian. She also they had duct tape there that matched the duct tape found around the bag where Kaylee was dumped. So we know that, in fact, nobody else could have done this but somebody in the family. And then, of course, we had the computer searches on the family's computer for chloroform, which is its own bizarre part of the story that we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then finally, of course, we had Grandma calling and saying that there's the dead body smell in the trunk. And she's obviously the one that reports all of this. And the parents are bizarre in their own ways. So, of all those things that I just listed out for you, the important part to know with criminal justice and our criminal investigation as police is what we know versus, for the lawyers, what we can prove. And we know a lot of stuff. That's all circumstantial. We know, 98% of people know Casey Anthony did it. Our problem is, of all of those pieces of evidence, what is it that we can use to prove that she did it? And the fact is other than lying to the police, which is a crime, none of those prove that she killed her child. We don't have the smoking gun here. We don't have her actually physically, doing whatever she did to Kaylee. All we have is a child's dead body. If you watch the Dr. G episode, you can tell that there was no way to tell cause of death because it had been too long since the body had been discovered. The body was decomposed. Supposedly, the FBI had removed the tape, so we don't know whether the tape was actually covering the nose to suffocate her or was just over the mouth. That we're not sure of, and unfortunately, it was never documented. And so the FBI can tell the jury all at once that it was there, but the jury wanted proof, and this has become a time of, CSI world where we want all of that CSI information. We want the fingerprints, we want the DNA, and in this case, we just don't have it because we don't have a cause of death. And if you can actually YouTube, some of the jurors actually talk about this. They couldn't tell how she died, and that was one of their big hangups. Now, let's take a step back for a minute. When it came to charging Casey Anthony, they believed they had the right person, and so they had some choices there. And they charged murder one. Murder one is very difficult to prove. It does carry the death penalty. That means it had to have been premeditated. And remember, we have to prove the mens rea. Remember mens rea? We talked about that before. We'll talk about it again in this week's case. We had to have the mental state that she had bad intentions to harm her child. And that's going to be very difficult to prove. Really, the only link that the prosecution could put to her premeditating this was the chloroform. And her defense attorney, and rightly so, argued that if you don't think Casey Anthony is that intelligent, well, chloroform's difficult to make. And so, was she actually smart enough to actually make it? And, that's arguable. When it came to the computer search for chloroform, Mom actually just blatantly lies on the stand, or Grandma. She basically said, and this was a great, bizarre moment in the case as well. Grandma says that she was actually looking up chlorophyll, which all of you know comes from plants, chlorophyll, because her dogs were getting tired, and she believed they were eating plants, and that led her to chloroform. Now, keep in mind, she said all of this, and the prosecution proved that, as a matter of fact, during those searches, she was physically at work, which she completely denied. She said she was not at work. She was obviously looking it up. We know she obviously wasn't. This was, many question why she would do that. It was a woman who lost her grandchild. I don't think she was in the mental state to lose her child as well to prison for killing her grandchild. So she did what a lot of mothers do, and they protect their child, and she lied on the stand. There's just no other way around that fact. She was at work, but she's going to claim that she was looking up stuff at home on the home computer. That just wasn't possible. So with that said, what else do we have that we can prove Casey Anthony did it? We don't. We don't have the chloroform to prove it was premeditated. And the Jose Baez, Casey Anthony's attorney, is going to argue that as a matter of fact, she drowned in the family swimming pool. So it was an accident. So if it's accidental, it can't be murder one. Now, the prosecution also charged with manslaughter and parental neglect. Obviously lesser charges, but easier to prove. Would those have fallen under that charge? And the answer is probably yes. Definitely the parental neglect, probably the involuntary manslaughter as well. The problem is that the media was so all over this case. Court TV was all over this case. Everybody wanted to see Casey Anthony Fry for this. And the prosecution really tried to push for that murder one decision. And unfortunately, it didn't work. They just couldn't convince the jury that this was premeditated. And because they spent so much time and effort into that, they did not spend as much time proving that the simple fact, this is a 3-year-old little girl that obviously, let's look at the defense's argument. The little girl who we knew from video could actually open the sliding glass doors. So she walked past Mom in her bathing suit, opens the sliding glass doors, goes outside. It's argued whether Casey had left the fence open from the night before. There was a ladder to the pool, whether that was left into the pool. Let's say it was. But she had enough time to open the sliding glass doors, walk outside, go over the fence, climb the ladder into the pool, and drown. And where was Casey? On the computer. To me, that's a slam dunk parental neglect. And honestly, My argument is somebody's responsible for this little girl's death, and the jury found that nobody was responsible. To me, that's where I have a problem with the jury. But again, this was a bad job by the prosecution. The prosecution did not charge correctly. The prosecution, it's not that they didn't charge correctly, but they didn't pursue what they could actually prove. They thought that the jury would go with the circumstantial evidence, and the jury just didn't buy the circumstantial evidence. They wanted proof. And that's where you have the problem in this case, is there is no physical evidence that actually proves that Casey killed Kaylee. Could it have been an accident? It could have. But that's where the manslaughter and the parental neglect charges come in. Now, obviously, the judge had a view in this as well, because the 4 counts of lying to the police, he maximized, which is hardly ever done, if ever. He maximizes those, but most of that comes down to time she had already served. And I know you don't like it, and I know you don't like how the ending. We've never had a student that actually bought into the Casey Anthony did not kill her child. Unfortunately, again, it comes down to, can we prove it? And in this case, we can't. So, sorry, folks. She's one that got away, probably. This week's is a little bit different twist. This week's, we know who killed them, who committed the crime. Person admitted to killing the crime. But we're going to take a look at mens rea of, was this a justified killing? So this week we're going to work on the Bernie Goetz case, and this one's a bizarre one all on its own. And this one you guys are going to debate guilty or not guilty, and you'll have some fun with this one. So until then, we will talk about that case next week. I'll be finishing the courtroom here in a few minutes. Enjoy.